Welcome to the second hour of the program and also our Mental Health Matters segment. I'm being joined by behavior change specialist Johanse Ayodike, to talk about overthinking. Good morning, Johanse Ayodike. How are you? which was overthinking happening right there.
Exactly.
So I was really happy to have this conversation with you because it's something that I have always done. I try to work on, but you know, it's a lot of, you know, those things happen kind of as a habit because it's become a safety valve, but it's not a beneficial habit. So how do we address it?
Well, firstly, is to be okay that everyone overthinks, right? I don't think anyone is immune to overthinking, but it's good to recognize all the situations when you do it. And I decided on this topic because maybe for the last 2 weeks, I've been trying this behavioral experiment on myself by not thinking. So let me explain. Whatever is the first thought or first choice that comes to mind, I try to go with it. I haven't been 100% perfect, so that's why I'm saying try. But I realized that any thought more than my natural self or the first thought is really an overthought. I used to think maybe 5, 10 thoughts past. My initial thought maybe was overthinking, but that one thought, even one thought past what you actually want to do is overthinking.
That's quite interesting, but that also seems really, really rigid. I mean, I don't know if you could see my expression, because you were saying you try to go with the first thought, and I'm like, that can't work for me. that sounds torturous.
Well, the thing is, I'm glad you brought up the point of rigid, and it could very well be it's something that I'm playing with right now, but I realized the benefits thus far is I feel less tired on evenings, and I'm even getting a little more sleep, and I realize the amount of energy that we use overthinking. And the irony is, at least for me and a lot of other people I spoke to, is that the overthinking is always negative. We never overthink in a positive way. All the nice things that could happen, we don't overthink it. We overthink negative. And because human behavior is thought into feeling into action, right? If we have a negative thought, then it creates the cascade of negativity. So imagine you have that first thought, whatever it is, it don't have to be positive or negative, but then you start adding negative thoughts, negative thoughts, negative thoughts. Of course, there be a cascade of negative feelings, and then of course, either you don't feel like doing anything anymore, or you make decisions and you feel anxiety while executing it.
So I wanted to talk more about what overthinking actually was and why it's so harmful. Of course, you just alluded to it. It does take energy to overthink, and you feel it, you know, but I wanted to, you know, because I don't want people to presume, I don't want to presume that people know what overthinking actually is. So I was hoping that you could give us just a quick little definition.
Overthinking is creating negative assumptions based on a choice. And I'm using the word negative specifically because that's how we humans typically use it. Because you can overthink positively, but we have the wonderful gift of imagination. And when something is placed in front of us, sometimes we tend to use this imagination. Well, I wonder what he would think. I wonder what she would think. I wonder if they will accept me. I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. I wonder how it will look. I wonder, and we keep imagine what could happen, It's usually negative. So overthinking is coming up with many negative scenarios based on a choice you may have in front of you.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I've had someone describe it to me as it leads to chaotic thinking. And for me, what that means is I try to overplan every possible scenario, you know, which is just a lot of energy, because the truth is you can overplan every possible scenario, but reality is going to come with its own rules. So
correct.
Yeah, and that can be distressing. Talk to us about some of the tips that one can do to address overthinking in a real meaningful way. I know you were doing your experiment with the, going with your first thought, but what are some of the things that you would want to flag with the people who you work with who are overthinking?
Firstly, even identify when you're overthinking, because sometimes people are not aware they're overthinking until they actually start feeling anxiety or feeling that nervousness. So if you're able to pay attention to, okay, let's say the phone rings, you see a certain name on the phone, you know immediately whether you want to answer it or not. But then you start overthinking. You see in that moment, identify it, and maybe even take a note of it. Why is this person or why is this scenario causing me to overthink? That's one. Two is to come to terms with the truth of yourself for any situation, because what usually stops us from doing what we want is not acknowledging the truth. So when we are faced with a choice, we all know what we want to do. We all know what we want to say. But then we start overthinking. So firstly, acknowledge the truth also of what you want to do. And then I would say, use your power of imagination well. If you can imagine negative scenarios and come up with all these things, you can also imagine positive scenario, and that's practice. Practice. So I also started practicing that. What are all the possible good things? So even start coming up with good things that may happen. Those are some quick tips.
I'm wondering too if one of the problems that people have is being really afraid of consequences of particular actions. How do you address that fear in a real way? Because the truth is, you might have to do certain unpleasant things and the consequence is going to be unpleasant, but you can't escape that.
Fear itself again is imagination, because when we come up with the things that we don't like or we think that will happen that may feel negative, that still is imagination. And I would say sit with yourself, because even in my experiments, I realized there's even some places with my own self-esteem and self-worth that was brought up that I was afraid of, let's say, being exposed or even facing some of my own inadequacies. So I would say sit with yourself, because sometimes we take for granted the work we have to do with ourselves, whether it is journaling, whether it is going to therapy, whether it is taking guidance, whether it is reading and understanding ourselves better, because the key is we are the instrument that we're using. And whenever there's something that may be unhealthy, because none of us perfect, there may be some scar, some trauma, something that may be causing us to overthink. Maybe if your parents used to shout at you in a certain scenario, and even as adults, if you never face that, if the scenario comes up, you will have that anxiety again or that fear about facing it. So I would say sit with yourself, identify the times when you overthink, and do some of the work, whether it's professional help, doing some meditation, doing some journaling, so you're able to unpack why you're feeling that fear.
Not long ago, the type of Caribbean parenting practices that we may have grown up with may look quite abusive today. Is it in your experience that also contributes to, an overthinking adult?
Definitely, I agree that the way that we were brought up definitely contributes to that, because if your choices or even your mistakes wasn't handled with love. Now, I using that love that maybe a little loosely, because each parent have a different way they may have communicated love or they may show love. But once it is faced with love, then that is what the child would expect. But if it wasn't faced with that, then a child grows up knowing or even thinking, well, if I make a mistake, if I fall short, if I, based on my choice, this is how the world will treat me. So definitely childhood and childhood early development will contribute to overthinking or even anxiety as an adult.
But how much do overthinkers clutter your practice as a behavior change specialist?
I would say a little bit over 50%, because they usually come when it reaches the anxiety stage. Because let's say I'm feeling for something, I could overthink it, right? That let's say something simple. But after a while, if I overthink in the morning, lunchtime, after lunch, if I continue overthinking, after a while it becomes anxiety, and then it depends on to the intensity of the situation. So there are many people who face anxiety because of a practice of overthinking. So a little bit more than 50% of people that come to me, and children also.
Oh, really? You're seeing a lot of overthinking from very young?
I would say from right before SEA age, let's say it was standard 4, right? When SEA starts coming into the periphery, standard 4, standard 5, until maybe about 16, 17, when is around CSEC, those exams. And then, of course, well, they are no longer children, but we're going into university stage, but as early as standard 4.
I don't want to leave us on a negative note. How do we address overthinking? How do we recognize it, and how do we deal with it as adults, and I guess also as children?
I'll give two quickly. One, use your power of imagination to imagine something, at least something positive in your overthinking process. And then also parents or even husbands and wives, when dealing with your children or your spouses, treat them with love in terms of their decision making, even though it's a mistake, so that the habit of expecting love, I mean, it may not always be the reality, but instead of expecting doom and gloom, that practice may be inculcated. Don't make it complicated, because even though life is not easy, it's really not that hard.
Thank you so much, Johanse Ayodike. Really, really important discussion. This overthinker will try to put some of those tips into practice. I can't promise the go with the first thought thing, but maybe the second.
Nah, try it, man. Try it. Even if it's half, but try it and see how it works.
I'll message you. After maybe by tomorrow, I'll let you know how it goes. Have a fantastic day. Thank you always for chatting with us.
Have a good one.
Right. So we're going to a very quick break. We have sports coming up on this Thursday, so don't go too far. We have our sports shot in a little bit.